What's going on, San Antonio Spurs fans? Welcome back to another edition of Pounding the Rock Spurs Talk. We've got a very special guest, Kevin O'Connor from The Ringer. What's going on, Kevin? How you doing?
I'm doing great today, Noah. How about yourself, man?
I'm awesome. Like I said before when we were talking, Spurs fans are going to love that a national media member is talking about the Spurs. I know you're a busy guy, and Spurs fans have heard me talk enough about the Spurs, so I want your opinion, and we'll hop into the questions. So I know you do a weekly power rankings. You had the Spurs at 23. It kind of lit Spurs Nation on fire. They were like, no way, the Spurs are, but I kind of tend to agree with you. Can you expand a little bit on your stance with ranking them 23rd? And if you were head coach Greg Popovich, what would be your goal for the rest of the season, seeing, they're below 500 now, and I don't think it's going to get a lot better.
Yeah, so I think with the power ranking that I had of them 23rd, the way we're doing those, I started off the season having the power rankings as like big picture, like championship hope power rankings. But the way most places do power rankings, it's like recent performance. So over the course of the season, we kind of pivoted towards recent performance, and the Spurs just have not been very good for quite some time now. Like, as you know, like the schedule's gotten tougher, and thus they've dropped down the rankings based off recent performance. But I think, all year I've been pretty consistent in saying, like on podcasts and in articles, that there's a lot of good happening in San Antonio that people really weren't paying a lot of attention to nationally, I think, in terms of the amount of good young players that are in San Antonio. So I don't think the ranking of 23rd changes a single thing about the fact that this team has a whole bunch of nice, impressive young players who are only getting better.
Absolutely. I've enjoyed watching this team. Like, my expectations for them coming into the year was play-in range. I just thought the West is just too talented, too deep, and they've kind of lived up to that expectation. They overachieved at the beginning of the season. But COVID hit them hard. Injuries have hit them hard. Lonnie's been gone for a while. Gorgie Jin got injured like 8 minutes into his Spurs debut. LMA is gone. So there's just been a lot of outside factors that have really factored in to how they've performed. Now, I kind of want to move from a short-term view to a long-term view of this team. DeMar DeRozan, Rudy Gay, Patty Mills, Trey Lyles, they're all on expiring contracts, and the Spurs are projected to have about $50.6 million in cap space this offseason. If you were in the front office, what would be your move? Because I'm looking at this free agent class, and I don't know if there's anybody really outside of maybe Lauri Markkanen or John Collins, who's like a pseudo big name that they could chase after with that money.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think when you consider the offseason, you have to consider the choices that they made prior to the trade deadline. And obviously, good decision to say so long to LaMarcus Aldridge. Jakob Poeltl at the center has been very effective for them, and investing in the younger players is a smart thing to do. But you do keep 3 upcoming, veteran unrestricted free agents in DeMar DeRozan, Rudy Gay, and Patty Mills. And obviously, I know you wrote about this week on Pounding the Rock how DeRozan has said he's open to, free agency, is an open mind about what could happen. And with San Antonio, very clearly, this team should be thinking young and investing in young players and investing minutes and resources into all of that. So in that sense, keeping those veterans does allow you to maintain some level of stability to help, in their eyes, perhaps facilitate development. And with this offseason, I think you could potentially still maintain some of those vets, whoever it might be, and still make an attempt to add another guy who might be a restricted free agent. Like, if I'm San Antonio, why not go after a John Collins type of player? Make a significant offer sheet, make Atlanta have to match that. The fit there would be kind of nice, I think, on paper. Depending on different lineups, you could use Collins at the 5. You could use him at the 4 as a floor spacer next to Poeltl if you wanted to. So I like that fit. And granted, San Antonio has like a lot of guards right now. I get excited about the idea of what Lonzo Ball would look like in San Antonio. I've not heard a thing about interest there, but it's just a fun thing to imagine for San Antonio to have a guy like that there. I'm curious what you think there. Like, do you think San Antonio should be going after some of these restricted free agents, or should they be kind of standing pat here and, playing it a little bit more conservative? Because this is a weaker overall free agent class.
Yeah, you know what? I've kind of flip-flopped back and forth. I've never been incredibly high on John Collins. I think he's a really talented player. I've been skeptical of his defense in the past, but I think You could easily fit him within the Spurs system. I think that he's a good fit alongside the other guys. You know, obviously Jakob is not someone who spaces the floor. And they need that. They've been one of the worst 3-point shooting teams in the NBA, not just in terms of percentage, but they're very low in volume. I think they're 28th in the NBA this season. So I'd like them to go chase after, just make a big move, because I think this front office has been conservative, and I'm not really trying to criticize them too much, but they've been conservative over the years. And I still think sometimes they operate like, you know, Tim Duncan, Manu, Tony are here, and those guys aren't here anymore, right? Those guys aren't here anymore. I love DeJounte. I love Derek. I love all the young guys they have, but I look at them and I'm not really sure who you're building around at this point. So yeah, I'd love to see them kind of just take a chance, do something, because you have a lot more money than you're used to. San Antonio is not a traditional free agent destination, but they will have almost more money than anyone else to just go throw at somebody, you know, figure it out. I'm not saying use it recklessly, but, you know, try to make a big move, because I think since Kawhi has been gone, with the whole debacle that happened there a few years ago, DeMar's been nice, but you can't build a championship contender around DeMar. And I think we've seen that.
Sure. And that has to be the goal, is what maximizes your odds of winning a championship. And with San Antonio, all the decades of success they've had, it's hard to question anything, you know, the front office and Greg Popovich decides to do. It's hard to question it. But even the best organizations, even the smartest people inside and outside of sports can be wrong sometimes and can make mistakes. It's just, that's human nature. People make mistakes. So it is fair to criticize choices there. And that's why, for what it's worth, like when it comes to DeRozan, when it comes to Patty Mills, you know, we saw George Hill got traded for a couple second round picks. It's not like the Spurs could have gotten a lot for Patty Mills or could have gotten a lot for Rudy Gay or even a lot for DeRozan for that matter. Like last season, when I reported that there was rumblings that Orlando had interest in DeRozan, that was it. That was it. When the Spurs traded Kawhi for DeMar DeRozan, at the time, interest in DeRozan around the league from Toronto was pretty minimal. There just wasn't a lot of interest in him, and that's unchanged. So it's not like San Antonio could have dealt him and got a lot, but I still do think, you know, it makes sense to keep the stability and it makes sense to not blow it up. But I wish they had gone the other way, because it does make a lot of sense to trade these guys and get some assets in return, because that could be ammo in the future for a guy. And not only that, there's a lot at stake this year. You said how the Spurs need that face of the franchise, that guy to build around. Well, that guy could be available in this 2021 draft. The top of the draft is really, really strong. And to me, I think if the Spurs had gone that way and trading away veterans, it's not like this is full of a team of scrubs. It's not like the Spurs would suddenly be at the bottom of the barrel. It's not like the Spurs would suddenly become an unwatchable product. No, the Spurs have been fun all year, last season and this season, with young, impressive players who are only getting better, regardless of the presence of the veterans on the court or not. In fact, sometimes they've been better without them. So I think investing fully in the youth and putting all minutes into those guys and losing DeRozan, possibly being worse to maximize your odds for a chance at that face of the franchise that you're talking about. To me, I look at the options San Antonio had and I'm like, yeah, I'll take the picks in the worst team for the better draft odds, for the higher odds of getting a guy that could change this franchise overnight. That's what I would have done. And I hope they take that approach this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of similar to stuff I've been saying all season. One of the things that really intrigued me before the season started was like the idea of adding an Evan Mobley to this group. I just think that would be fantastic. That would be fantastic. And one thing that not all Spurs fans, but a good amount of Spurs fans have pushed back on is like, look, the Spurs aren't losers. They're not going out there to lose. And I'm saying you don't have to go out there with the intentions of losing. Just a group of like DeJounte, Derek, all the other young guys, they're just not good enough to compete for a title. They're not. They're maybe not good enough to compete for a championship, but like you said, they have a lot of talent. Like, so if you added a top end talent to that group, it's not like they're immediately awful. They're good. And then I think a lot of fans forget Tim Duncan and David Robinson came through the top of the draft. Exactly. You had to be bad to get somebody. And yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
But like the other guy though, Kawhi, like Spurs fans might say you traded up to get Kawhi Leonard, but when you like the Spurs have proven they're unafraid to go up and get a guy if they have to, but you don't want to be reliant on trading up for a guy. I mean, just a couple of years ago, remember when the Celtics offered like 4 or 5 first-round draft picks to move up just a couple spots to get Justice Winslow? Nobody said yes. Nobody said yes because they all had these players that they were fixed on and locked in on. Sometimes a draft works out a way in which nobody trades. And I think for San Antonio, like if that were part of the thought process, like yeah, we want our guy at 8, we'll trade up and get him if we have to. There's no guarantee that the team was willing to say yes. There's no guarantee that someone else doesn't move up even more preemptively to try to get that guy. Like that can happen. A Patrick Williams can move up throughout the draft process from being a mid to late lottery pick to being drafted 4th by Chicago last year. So I think about it this year specifically, give me the better odds in a year that you could even possibly trade down and still get your guy and get more. I mean, I feel like we're totally on the same page with that, Noah.
Definitely. And you know, one of the other things that irks me sometimes is Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker's, Kawhi Leonard's, Jimmy Butler's, Nikola Jokic. Yeah, sure, you can find them that late in the draft, but that's the exception to the rule. You know, not every single guy the Spurs are drafting at 29, 28, 41. They're not going to become that guy every time. Like I like Trey Jones. I think he has a future in the NBA. I think his future is brighter if he can learn to shoot the 3 ball. But that guy is not a Jokic. I mean, clearly he's not a Jokic. Manu Ginobili was sort of before the international scouting kind of phenomenon came around, and they found him. They found the guy he developed on a pretty insane plane. So not every guy that they're going to find is going to be that Hall of Famer. And speaking of young guys, I did want to ask you your thoughts on the young core, specifically DeJounte Murray, Jakob Poeltl, Lonnie Walker, Keldon Johnson, Luka Šamanić, Devin Vassell, and Trey Jones. What are your thoughts on those guys? You don't have to talk about all of them if you don't want to, but I want your thoughts on some of them. You know, what could their ceilings be, and what is probably their realistic outcomes?
I mean, I think of those guys, Keldon Johnson is my personal favorite to watch. Not that he'd be the best, but I just love the energy that he plays with, the tenacity, getting to the basket. Like it's just kind of comical watching him drive to the rim sometimes. He's so aggressive, and there's nothing you can put 5 defenders in the paint. He will be unafraid, but he'll also make the smart play. He doesn't have tunnel vision necessarily. And I really appreciate that about him. I think the Spurs have done a nice job with their developmental system as well, helping improve those scoring habits. He's just a really nice player. And Devin Vassell goes without saying that he has that 3-and-D potential, but I feel like kind of like with Mikal Bridges for the Phoenix Suns, that there's still more to his game. Like at Florida State, I forget the numbers exactly off the top of my head, but I believe as a freshman at Florida State, he had 2 dribble jumpers all season long. And then he hit 39 dribble jumpers as a sophomore with Florida State. We're seeing the little flashes here and there of what Devin Vassell might look like 5 years from now, or even just 3 years from now. Like there's more to him than just being a defender and a 3-point shooter or attacks closeout. So, I mean, those 2 guys I really like. DeJounte Murray, obviously dynamic, goes without saying. The jumper needs to improve. The defense is, I mean, absolutely sensational. Some of the stuff that he's done this year, the strip of Jamal Murray, the strip of Kemba Walker, all in the same week, like just ludicrous. Like the guys don't do that. But he does on the regular. So the Spurs, it's like you said earlier, they have that foundation of youth. They have the room of the young guys that you want to build with, and these guys play the style that they need to. They play with each other. They play unselfishly. It's a great group. They just need that number 1 guy with them to really reach their potential. But I don't know, like there's not a single guy that's young in the Spurs roster that I don't look at and be like, oh, I don't like that player. I like all these young guys.
Yeah, I like all of them as well. I think they all bring something like sort of unique to the table, even though there's a little bit of positional.
It fits too, overlap. Right? Doesn't it?
Yeah, it fits pretty well. Yeah, and I want to backtrack to Keldon Johnson because one thing at the very beginning of the season, he was driving me crazy because he would just go straight line to the hole, like head down, would not pass it out like Lonnie would be open or Patty would be wide open on the perimeter. And he's made some good strides in that area. I feel like this season. And then with Lonnie, I feel like the injury was so the timing of the injury with his wrist was just so untimely. He had a career high 31 against the Bucks. And then the next game came out, played like 3 minutes and just couldn't go anymore. The wrist had been bothering him for a while. He had like a wrap on it. It wasn't on the injury report, which I found strange. And then he's been out for like 2 weeks. So, he's a guy who I've been up and down on. He's someone who shows flashes, but I still think as a ball handler, he has a long way to go. Very loose with the handle. Got stripped by Boogie Cousins in the preseason, just off a crossover. I thought that was a little rough to watch. But one guy, and maybe you haven't seen him too much. Obviously, he hasn't played too much in the NBA. Luka Šamanić. Do you have any thoughts on Luka Šamanić? Because Spurs fans he's either a bust or he's the next superstar. And I think, that's normal for fans. But for me, he's probably a starter to role player. Like that's just what I see from him. That's what I've seen from him in the G League when I covered him there. Made a breakdown on him in his limited NBA film. I just don't see the superstar thing there. What do you see from him?
I mean, I definitely don't see the superstar thing there. I wrote a little blurb about him in my power rankings on March 8th on the Ringer, just with the headline, "There's another Luka in Texas." I mean, yeah, he can handle the ball. For a guy his size, that has some value for you. And, there's that ability to be a larger player with ball skills. Those guys always have a chance. And so with him, I'd like to see him get some more consistent reps just to see what can happen. I mean, I love what the Oklahoma City Thunder are doing this year. To me, I look at their player development program and the way they're investing playing time and minutes and reps. The guys are failing and they're getting better from it. I think Mark Dagnall and the coaching staff there is doing a great job with investing. I'd love to see Luka get that opportunity here with San Antonio to fail consistently and to get better from it, because there's no doubt talent.
Absolutely. Alexei Pokushevsky was one of my favorite guys in the
draft.
Yeah. I had him 8 on my big board.
Poku, you had him 8th. Hell yeah, baby.
I did. I was super high on him.
Would you have Killian Hayes ranked?
Oh man, I had him
1.
Third. I had him 3rd. So I'm a little, I mean, injuries and other,
it's too soon. It's too soon. Like this year, I got so many tweets from people after the 7 games he played when he got hurt. Like,
I bet
you're an idiot. And it's like, dude, he's played 7 games. You can't judge a player's entire career after just their first 7 games, especially when they were playing hurt. And with Pokushevsky, people made the same jokes early on, and now he's averaging about 20 points the last 5-6 games, making some really sensational plays that you just don't see from a 7-footer, like crossing up guards in the open court. It's crazy what he's doing.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That's partially because he's been able to, go through it and just thrown into the fire, and he's dealing with it well.
Yeah, no, I loved what I've seen from him. I like what I've seen from Moses Brown, Isaiah Roby, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I have League Pass. They're probably the number 2 team I watch outside of the Spurs. I just enjoy it. I don't care if they win or lose. It's just fun to watch them, see the player development there. But yeah, I mean, with the Spurs, I'd love to see them go that route, but I think it's going to be really tough to get that out of Pop. He's, always been a big veteran guy, loves the guys who know the system the best. Like, for example, last night, Rudy Gay, 2 of 10 from the field, played 34 minutes. Luka Šamanić didn't check in until 5 minutes left in the game when they were down by 20. I just can't help but feel like Luka could have been in there just to switch it up, just see what he can do. I don't care if he's bad or good, but he has had sort of a body language issue in San Antonio, head down, doesn't look happy on the bench, looks uncomfortable out there. And then there was a stint right when he came back from the G League, when he was the center of the G League offense. Rudy Gay was gone because of COVID. He had 8 games in a row where it was like, wow, this guy could, he could be a rotation player. And since Rudy came back, just hasn't had the opportunity to play. And, the same thing with Trey Jones, Devin Vassell to a lesser extent. He's pretty much played in every game, which I've been really happy with. Spurs fans came at me really hard when I told them this guy's going to play every single game this season, and he's going to play double-digit minutes. He's not a Luka Šamanić. He's not someone who's going to need that, seasoning in the G League per se. So I've been happy with what I've seen from Devin. And I do think, calling him like a 3-and-D guy, or some people have, is selling him short, because I do think he has some, off the bounce potential. He's shown some nice, he had a nice like half spin to turnaround jumper the other night. It went down, and a few of the other ones haven't gone down this season. He's been kind of bad from the mid range, but I think that's just going to, game experience is only going to help him.
You mentioned part of it's Popovich, like he wants to play veterans, and like, I understand and get the idea of having veterans and having stability rather than tearing it down completely and possibly not being able to build up. I think San Antonio's situation is different because I love the young players that they have, and I think the team can be competitive and not an eyesore to watch even without the presence of veterans. But with that said, though, do you feel like Popovich does need to evolve a bit here in terms of like even system? Like you said, 28th, and I think 3-point frequency earlier. Like they don't take a lot of threes still, even though they take more than they did before. They play a lot of veterans in a year that the draft is loaded up top, and they could maybe, try to not win quite as much and focus on development more. Does Pop need to evolve a little bit here?
I'll try to keep my good standing with the Spurs, but I mean, I think a little
their
bit,
PR
right?
guy.
They're tight, man. They're tight. They run a tight ship there. But no, I mean, yeah, I think some innovation is necessary. It's kind of funny they set the record for most 3-point attempts per game in franchise history last season, and they're on pace to do it again this season. But they're still like at the very bottom of the league, and right now, they're also number 1 in the league in mid-range attempts per game. I just don't know how that works. I don't know how that works in this era of pace and space basketball. I'm not saying they have to shoot, 43s per game, but definitely, switch it up a little bit. And of course, a little bit of it is personnel. When Rudy Gay has been your second most reliable 3-point shooter on the season, that's a little bit telling of the personnel you have. But I do think, there is room to innovate a little bit. Of course, I think they have. The pace has gone up in the last couple of seasons. Like I said, they have added some more 3-pointers to the offense. And one of the things that they did, which I think actually genuinely upset LaMarcus Aldridge a little bit before he was on his way out, was they pretty much eliminated his post touches. He was in there, but he wasn't doing his usual, sitting on one of the elbows waiting for the ball to come to him. There wasn't a lot of turnaround jumpers from him before he left San Antonio. They asked him to do a lot of pick and pop stuff, and I don't know, maybe they can innovate a little bit, but I think as long as Popovich is here, he's probably going to stay true to who he is, what he knows. And I think he kind of has the right to a little bit, 23, 24 years with the organization, 5 championships, 22 straight playoff appearances. So I'm willing to write it out. Just let him do what he wants, because there's only one more year left on his contract, and who knows if he's coming back after that.
LaMarcus Aldridge post touches. I just looked this up on Second Spectrum. 2017-18 season, he logged 14.3 post touches per game. Then it dropped to 12.2 in 18-19. Then it went to 9.8 per game in 19-20. And then this season, it's at 4.4 per game. So it's like 25%, nearly 25% of what it was just 4 seasons ago. That's according to Second Spectrum for post touches per game. That's a lot. That's a lot. A big difference for him. And I would imagine going to Brooklyn, he's like, well, I'm not going to touch the ball as much, but at least I'll be competing for a championship. And by the way, like, he is getting quite a few touches there. He looks like a totally different player. He's actually contesting shots on defense.
I saw him, and he's not contesting 3-pointers from like right at the rim.
Dude, it's like ridiculous. It was comical watching him doing that with the Spurs this year.
Oh man, it was
how do you feel about that? Like how do Spurs fans feel about that? Like, do you see a guy go from doing that, contesting 3-point shots from the paint, to actually playing hard on defense?
Yeah, I tweeted last night. I was like, LaMarcus finished with 22 points in 23 minutes, and he met Zion at the rim, and Spurs fans ate it up. They were like, "Oh, I can't believe it!" Like, everybody had us. The media had us convinced he was washed, but I'm like, what else were we supposed to tell you? That's what he was giving us. It's hard to tell how much of it is effort, how much of it was just he had come back from a shoulder injury, shoulder surgery in the offseason. He hadn't had time to get used to his new role. He was uncomfortable this season within his role. And then when he was asked to go to the bench, an injury arose that wasn't previously there. And then he was gone for 8 games. So, I don't know what to make of it too much. I do think he's happier now. His body language has done a 180. He looks comfortable there, and I'm happy for him. Some Spurs fans are upset, but the majority of them really appreciate what he did for San Antonio that year that Kawhi was, kind of wishy-washy about, appearing in games. And I think 23 points per game, all NBA second team, carried the Spurs to 48 wins with a supporting cast of Kyle Anderson and Danny Green. So I don't know. Some part of me is a little frustrated that we didn't get more of that out of LaMarcus, so that maybe there was more trade value to be had. But at the end of the day, I don't really think it would have affected his value on the trade market all that much. I kind of felt like a buyout was almost inevitable.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
But one of the other things I wanted to ask you was, we were just talking about the young players with San Antonio. I usually do our draft content at Pounding the Rock. I wrote like 60 scouting reports last year. I was busy. I was real busy. I had a lot of free time on my hands with the pandemic. I haven't had as much free time this year. So I'm not kind of privy to everything that's been going on in college basketball. There's certain guys I've watched, but I want to know who are some guys in this year's draft class who you think would be a good fit for the Spurs, maybe in that late lottery range to sort of 15 to 20-ish range. There's a couple of guys I like Kai Jones a lot for them. I don't know if he
Kai
falls
Jones
there.
Is nice, yeah.
But who are some guys who you like for them who might be a good fit?
The number one guy that comes to mind is Scotty Barnes from Florida State. I'm just like, he plays the way that you want a Spurs player to play, with a lot of effort, a lot of heart, love for the game. Like, he's a hustle player. He's a gritty player. And I love those qualities in anybody that I would be bringing into my organization if I were a GM. And with him, like, he is 6'9", 225 pounds, 19-year-old freshman of Florida State. He can handle the ball a little bit for you. He's got some playmaking skills. He basically played point for Florida State this year. The number one concern with him is the shooting. And there's nobody better, perhaps nobody better than Chip England at helping guys with some issues in their shots. And even if, and I'm just intrigued because I think San Antonio, more so than just the focusing of the shooting, Popovich and the Spurs have always done a good job of putting guys into positions to succeed because they typically emphasize strengths and they minimize weaknesses. And that's not every coach does that. It's just the case. Like, Spurs fans are very lucky. Like, Pop is great in that regard. Scotty Barnes, with his size, I'd be intrigued to see how Popovich would use him as kind of a playmaking post hub, a high post elbow hub guy, have him Bam Adebayo style, we have him near the wing or the elbow and have him facilitate a little bit for you. I think that could be an effective way to use Scotty Barnes while he's still in the developmental phase as a shooter. But to me, he stands out as a guy that could easily exceed expectations, especially if he falls into a good environment like San Antonio, where they have some guards to help alleviate some of those possible fit issues. But when guys don't shoot well, that is a concern. But we're talking about late lottery here, and so
do you think he falls that far in the lottery? Do you feel like he's going to be? I mean, because the way it's shaping up right now, the Spurs are, I think, they're the 9th seed in the Western Conference. So I think overall, if they were to miss the playoffs, I believe, and I was on Tankathon earlier, but I can't remember. I believe they're 14th. So they would be like literally the bottom of the lottery. I don't see them, unless they get really lucky, somehow moving up.
Still time.
There's still time. I'm looking at their schedule. It's brutal. They play the Suns 3 times. They play the Nuggets twice. They play the Nets. They play the Heat twice. There's a ton of potential to lose a lot of games here. They even play the Jazz twice. So there's a lot of games.
Second hardest schedule in the league, according to Tankathon.
Yeah. So, I mean, it could happen, but it's moments like last night against the Nuggets where the Spurs are up 10 and you're like, whoa, I mean, they're playing well, but then they kind of fall apart and you're like, okay, well, that's not that surprising given their personnel, given the injuries right now, but I don't know what to expect from them because they've just been so up and down. I do like a guy, Usman Garuba. I like him a lot, but I think there's also that similar worry where he's not a shooter. Obviously, he's not a shooter. He hasn't had as good of a season this year as he did the previous year. So I think it may be a reach to grab him in that range. I don't know if he will be there. I kind of don't have a great idea of where he will be available. Same thing with Scotty Barnes. He's a guy who I really liked coming into this year. But I definitely don't want to see the Spurs draft another guard. Not because I don't like guards. I just don't know what they can do with that at that point. There's just a lot of.
How about like a wing? I mean, like Corey Kispert disappointed during, the finale with Gonzaga, and people are talking about him falling from a mid-lotto pick to a late lotto pick. I mean, he's not going to get the defensive attention that he did at Gonzaga ever in the NBA, ever. That's just not going to happen. So I still am intrigued by him in a role where he is next to those guards who handle the ball and do all the creating, and he's just playing off that. That's intriguing to me.
I like that as well.
I like him too.
Yeah, I like that as well. One of the things that I was really curious about with Kispert is what kind of shooter is he in the NBA? Is he like a generational level shooter? Is he like a Joe Harris, Duncan Robinson, sort of where he's like knocking down 44% of his threes or in the NBA, or is that unrealistic? Because I liked what I saw. I mean, he has a smooth stroke. He shot about 50% in college this year from 3-point range and on a ton of attempts. I think it was like 6 or 7 attempts per game. I really like him. I just know a lot of Spurs fans are very like defensive minded. They want a guy who's going to play a gritty defense, who's not going to be a liability. And I don't know. I feel like it's hard to hide guys in the NBA.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you hide him.
Yeah, for sure. I think in the way the league operates nowadays, it's increasingly difficult to hide a player. If you have one weak link on the floor, the offense will find them. And with Kispert, I do think his defense has improved in the years at Gonzaga to at least be passable. If not good at some point in the NBA. That can't be, I wouldn't rule that out with him being a good defensive player. It just may take time to get there with strength and conditioning, adapting to the speed of the game, the physicality of the game and all that. But his year-to-year progression at Gonzaga is at least encouraging in terms of projecting forward with all the NBA resources that he'll have at his disposal when he does get there.
Now, let me ask you this. I kind of already have my own opinion about it, but some Spurs fans, they look at him and they go, oh, well, Bryn Forbes knocked down like 44% of his 3-pointers for San Antonio, but he couldn't do anything on the defensive end. And he was a big reason why they were bad. I don't think that he's not that level. And he has way more size. I mean, he's significantly
bigger.
taller, right? So
6'7", 220, big guy.
Liability?
No, I think he'll be better than Bryn Forbes. We're on the same page there, but I do understand, when you see Forbes and what happened there, you might be scared off, but I wouldn't compare them too much in that sense.
Okay, so we'll go. I think we are on the same page there. We'll move on a little bit. So, I mean, we've talked about it. This ball club has not been very good. They haven't been very healthy. The last probably 12 games, probably since right before the All-Star break. Is there anything that you see that San Antonio could maybe do to kind of mitigate the damage that's being done here? Turn it around. And how much of their struggles would you attribute to the loss of LaMarcus Aldridge? I tend to say not much, because I don't think he would have been bringing that same effort and energy to San Antonio, but maybe you think differently.
No, not much. I'm with you there. I think the idea of LaMarcus Aldridge would be a loss, but the reality of LaMarcus Aldridge is not much of a loss. If anything, you could argue it was an upgrade. I do think with San Antonio, this is something you could see coming in some ways. Obviously, you'd like to see them performing better than they have as the schedule has gotten more difficult, but dude, there's some tough teams this year in the NBA. This year with the MVP race, there's so many legitimate candidates that deserve to be in the conversation. There's so many teams that have legitimate hopes of making a run to the conference finals, if not the NBA finals, that have a chance to actually win the whole thing. So this is a tough year. And with San Antonio's schedule being the way it has been recently and will be in the near future, I mean, I don't think there's a lot that gives me confidence in them being like a 6 seed like they were for a little bit. Zero confidence there, and only a little bit of confidence with them being a play-in tournament team. I mean, right now they're 9th. They are a game up on Golden State, 3 games up on New Orleans and Sacramento. And I'm not so sure that those teams are any better. But the Golden State Warriors have Stephen Curry on their team. The New Orleans Pelicans have Zion Williamson, and those teams behind them just have the better player. And those teams down the stretch, when they need to win games, are going to ride those players hard. So I feel better about those teams with their easier, lighter schedules down the stretch than I do about San Antonio's roster with their much, much, much harder schedule.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm on the same page with you here. I mean, when they were coming out of the All-Star break and they announced the second half of the schedule, it was 40 games in 68 days, no more than 1 day of rest between any of these games. And their opponents were really tough. I just didn't see them hanging on. Now, maybe they do. Maybe they surprise someone. I mean, I think with the play-in, as a lower seed, like the 9th and 10th seed, you got to win 2 games to get into the playoffs.
Yes,
so I don't know. It's not like March Madness where 1 game and you're in, you get lucky. You have to be better than those teams. And I don't know that San Antonio is better than Golden State Warriors with Steph. I don't know that they're better than, say, the Mavericks or the Grizzlies, who are also kind of in that range. So I don't have a ton of confidence in them for that. Now, I don't want to take too much more of your time, but this is a question from Spurs fans. They really wanted to know, they've been hearing about DeMar on the trade block for a couple of years now. Could you give us an idea of what sort of packages were on the table for DeMar DeRozan at the trade deadline, or even in the past couple trade deadlines? And if you would have pulled the trigger on those deals?
I haven't heard a peep about what was or wasn't on the table. Nothing ever really leaks out of San Antonio. Maybe,
Fair.
I mean, I would view that as a very good thing. If you're a Spurs fan, it can be frustrating. If stuff isn't out there, you're not hearing anything, but it's a good thing. Trust me, it's a good thing when you're not hearing anything. Maybe somebody like Woj reports much more than I do with no specifics there. But, I think, like I said earlier, all I've really heard regarding DeRozan in recent years is Orlando had some level of interest at some point. And obviously that changed. They've become sellers. Their direction has changed completely. So any potential past interests is irrelevant at this point. So like I said earlier, I don't think there's ever really been a lot of league-wide interest in DeMar DeRozan because of his style of play, and which is weird because he's having one of the most efficient isolation scoring seasons ever, this year and last year. Pick and roll, he is near the top of the league in terms of efficiency, despite his style of play, despite not having elite floor spacing around him. I'm intrigued by this new version of DeMar DeRozan as his playmaking has improved a lot. But I even now, there's so many mixed opinions around the league about DeMar DeRozan from within front offices, from team to team. There's different opinions. So I'm going to be really fascinated to see what happens with his free agency here. And maybe for the San Antonio Spurs, this is just what I was thinking about, when you asked me to come on. I was like, the idea of blowing it up. What if San Antonio is entering the offseason? Like, we could get more for DeRozan in the offseason in a sign and trade, because the contenders that don't have cap space, that might flop in the playoffs, that might be thinking, we need a scorer, we need a shot creator, those teams might be like, our only way to get DeMar DeRozan is a sign and trade. And if that's the case, San Antonio could potentially have leverage to get something back in return. So this is not anything I've heard. It is not even, anything that's been hinted at me from anybody. It's just my own thoughts from a strategic point of view. If you're not trading that guy now for what you think is less value than what is deserved, which I personally think DeRozan is better than a lot of people think in the NBA, despite his flaws, maybe San Antonio is looking at it that way, that maybe he could be one of the most valued commodities in free agency, where either they can decide to keep him or decide to sign and trade him to a team that doesn't have cap space. And that's where I'm really, really intrigued for what's going to happen moving forward. But then again, he could just leave and walk for nothing. That's that could happen too.
Yeah. I would hope that, after the last couple of years in San Antonio, that maybe he would want to do them a favor, but nobody's obligated. Like I always say that, like players are not obligated to do anything. Even with Kawhi, I was frustrated with it, but he wanted to go home. Did he have a couple of years on his contract? Yes. Did his value tank a little bit? Yes. But I'm not upset about it anymore. Some fans are, but I will never be upset about for a player, because it's, they have a limited amount of time to make a lot of money. They are human beings. So, whatever they want to do, I'm pretty much on board with it. I'm very player power forward. That's what I like to see. But I think it's also very interesting what you said. That's an interesting scenario to kind of throw out there. And I do believe that DeMar DeRozan is kind of criminally undervalued around the league, at least by like a lot of fans, not necessarily Spurs fans, just fans in general, because yes, he does shrink the floor a little bit on offense if he doesn't have the ball in his hands. Yes, he's not a great defender, or really even a good defender at this point.
Unfortunately. And that's like the other side of it. Like offense, I say most efficient this, most efficient that, but defensively it's still like, we talked earlier about, you will get hunted, people will find you, but then again, effort also improves in the postseason too.
That's true.
That's the other side of it.
Yeah. And when I think of DeMar DeRozan, I think he could, like, just because he didn't work out as a first option in San Antonio or a first option in Toronto doesn't mean he can't be, a second, third guy and be excellent in that role. So I think
Imagine DeRozan off the bench as a 6-man spark plug for your team, running the offense a little bit, scoring against backups. I get really intrigued by DeRozan in that role.
That would be very exciting. I don't know if he accepts that kind of role, but
that's the thing.
But it would be exciting. And I do really like what he brings to the table. I really admire DeMar DeRozan. I'm glad that he's in San Antonio for now. He's added a kind of an interesting dynamic in terms of entertainment value. He's been fun to watch, even if he doesn't really fit the modern game. He definitely has been fun to watch. And before I let you go, I just wanted to ask you kind of a random question. I didn't put it on our list of questions, but do you have like a favorite San Antonio Spurs memory of, because I mean, not everybody watches the Spurs. That's totally fair. Even though they won 5 championships, it's totally fair. But do you have a favorite memory of the San Antonio Spurs or any one of their players?
I mean, obviously beating Miami in the finals, that goes without saying. Just all of it. Just what an unbelievable year after everything that happened and everything that transpired the year prior. It's just a great story. And I think, the NBA TV, Popovich, Duncan, Ginobili, Parker conversation afterwards, just some of the life lessons that could be gleaned from that video. That sticks out to me a lot. And, I grew up a Celtics fan, and I'll always just remember losing to the Spurs every year, twice a year, always losing to the Spurs. that was always a memory for me, just how dominant those teams were. I just, as a kid, I'm 30 now. So like in the mid 2000s, I just remember watching TV or like reading stuff online. People were like, the Spurs are boring. The Spurs are boring, but the Spurs always won. And that they are still, in a position where you can still see them winning in the years to come. I just appreciate, I think, I don't know if there's any single one moment, but I just appreciate their ability to always bring guys in and put them into roles to succeed. I think the Spurs, like the Patriots in the NFL, like there are certain organizations and sports that I think show how to run a team and how to put a collection of people together and have success. And the Spurs over 2 decades have done that. And that's, I mean, like I'm getting like probably non-basketball talk here, but that's always what stood out to me about the San Antonio Spurs, because I saw that in the Patriots all my years watching them, and I saw that in San Antonio. And I just think that the run of consistency over the years is what's most admirable more than anything else, and is something that a lot of teams need to look at and learn from.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for joining me. And I know that people probably know where to find your work, but go ahead, let people know, where to find your work, where they can follow you on Twitter, and feel free to plug anything that you're working on, anything that you, dropped earlier this week or today.
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Kevin O'Connor NBA. And every Tuesday and Friday, I host The Mismatch with my co-host Chris Vernon, and every other Wednesday, Ringer NBA University, where that's the show that we would talk a lot about, like Spurs types of guys. We focus on younger players on that show, and we do that every other Wednesday with me, Jay Kyle-Mann, and Jonathan Chark. So I enjoyed this conversation with and I think if Spurs fans enjoyed this too, that they might like Ringer NBA U or The Mismatch. So thank you for having me on, dude. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks again, Kevin, for joining me. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to come talk Spurs basketball with me. I'm sure Spurs fans are going to love this. And Spurs fans, thank you so much for getting me in contact with Kevin O'Connor. I don't think this collaboration could have happened without y'all. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for supporting me here. But as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button if you want to know when the next video is dropping. And until next time, Spurs fans, take care.